The Ray at Pier 19. Detective Adam Cole stood at the end of a long, creaking pier, his boot heels tapping against the weathered wood, softened by years of salt air and the weight of secrets no one wanted to talk about. The sky above New York's East River was bruised with a dull orange glow, a sunset fighting to cut through the haze of pollution and storm clouds rolling in from the Atlantic. Adam adjusted the strap of his tactical vest, the Velcro rasping loudly in the tense silence. Beside him, Detective Eric Monroe stood with his rifle slung across his chest, his face locked in that familiar grimace Adam had seen too many times. They had been here before, too many times, chasing ghosts through abandoned warehouses, following trails that evaporated just as they got close. But this time, it felt different. It felt final. "This the one," Eric muttered, his voice low, so the younger officers wouldn't hear the doubt buried in it. Adam's jaw clenched, and he gave the barest nod. "It's him. Victor Marone's got his fingerprints all over this place." Victor Marone. The name tasted like rust in Adam's mouth. The man was more than a crime boss. He was a shadow stretching across the entire city, fingers digging into everything from narcotics to illegal arms, from human trafficking to corrupt politicians. Adam had chased him for years, always arriving too late, always one step behind. Tonight, he would end that chase, or die trying. The command crackled through their earpieces. "Go." The first officer hit the heavy steel warehouse door with a battering ram, the impact echoing across the water. The door shuddered, groaned, then gave way with a metallic scream. Officers poured inside, boots slamming against concrete, flashlights cutting through the gloom like searchlights in a storm. The air smelled like oil, rust, and something sharper, something that smelled like fear. Adam moved in behind them, his sidearm raised. Years of training sharpened his senses. He could hear the creak of a footstep on metal scaffolding overhead, the flutter of a tarp near the loading docks. The warehouse was massive, a labyrinth of crates, machinery, and half-forgotten equipment. Everything was covered in a thin film of grime, as if the whole place had been holding its breath for years. A gunshot rang out, loud and close. Adam dove behind a stack of shipping containers, feeling the hot spray of concrete chips as bullets bit into the wall behind him. Eric returned fire, the muzzle flash illuminating the tight snarl on his face. They moved together, two halves of the same instinct, sweeping the room corner by corner. But something was wrong. It was too quiet. Where were Marone's heavy hitters? His enforcers, the guys with necks wider than their heads and guns that could take down a helicopter. The only resistance they met were low-level grunts, guys barely old enough to shave, firing wildly and running for the exits. "They knew we were coming," Eric growled, pressing his back to a crate beside Adam. Adam's gut twisted. It was always the same, tipped off, just in time. Every time they got close to Marone, the man slipped through their fingers like smoke. But this time, Adam had one last chance to get something. Someone. They cleared the main floor, officers securing the stragglers they'd managed to corner. Adam's heart pounded, sweat sticking his shirt to his back. A corridor stretched at the rear of the warehouse, a forgotten hallway lined with rusted doors. He and Eric moved cautiously, checking each room. Empty offices, a storeroom, a half-flooded bathroom. The last door was different. A heavy-duty padlock hung from the latch, the kind you didn't use unless you were keeping something important inside. Adam's chest tightened. "Cover me," he said. Eric raised his rifle, aiming down the hall. Adam stepped back and kicked the door just beside the lock. The wood splintered, the padlock clattering to the floor. He swung the door open, gun raised. Inside, the room was dim, the single flickering bulb casting long, shuddering shadows across the bare concrete floor. In the corner, huddled like a bird with a broken wing, was a woman. Her wrists were bound behind her back with plastic zip ties, her knees drawn up to her chest. Her clothes were torn, her skin mottled with bruises, her brown hair tangled and matted with sweat and dust. She flinched at the light, shrinking back against the wall, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. Terror radiated off her in waves, but there was something else, something deeper than fear, something almost deliberate. Adam lowered his gun but didn't holster it. "NYPD," he said, his voice softer than it had been in years. "You're safe now." The woman's mouth trembled, but no sound came out at first. Adam moved slowly, pulling his knife to cut the zip ties. She winced as her arms were freed, the circulation rushing back in painful tingles. When she spoke, her voice was a whisper so faint Adam had to lean in to hear it. "Please, don't let them take me back." The words were a plea, but they also carried a weight Adam couldn't quite name. There was more there, hidden beneath the desperation. "We won't," Adam said, his grip firm but gentle on her arm as he helped her to her feet. "I've got you." Outside, the night was alive with the pulse of red and blue lights, the crackle of radios, the shuffle of boots. Officers were loading the few captured syndicate members into squad cars, but Adam's focus was on the woman beside him. "Name?" he asked. She hesitated, her lips parting slightly before she found her voice. "Evelyn," she said. "Evelyn Reed." He filed it away, but something in his gut twisted. The way she said her name, too careful, too rehearsed. In the shadow of a nearby shipping crate, a figure watched them. The man's leather jacket glistened with rain, his hands buried in his pockets. A slow, knowing smile curled across his face as Adam led Evelyn to the ambulance. Everything was going exactly as planned. Hours later, in the cramped interrogation room back at the precinct, Evelyn sat across the table from Adam. She clutched a styrofoam cup of water, her fingers trembling just enough to make the water ripple. She was small, her frame lost in the oversized sweatshirt a paramedic had handed her. Her eyes, though, were sharp beneath the exhaustion. "Ready to talk?" Adam asked, keeping his voice even. She nodded, her throat working as she swallowed. "I was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Adam leaned back, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of her own words to press down on her. Victims always had a story, the truth, the lie they told themselves, and the lie they told everyone else. He needed to find the cracks between them. Evelyn's story was simple. She worked at a dive bar near Brighton Beach. One night, she overheard something about a shipment. Drugs, she thought. She didn't think much of it until she was dragged into a black SUV outside her building 2 days later. "I didn't know who they were," she whispered. They kept me locked up. Said if I talked, they'd kill me." Adam's pen tapped against his notepad. "And they just kept you alive all this time." Her gaze flickered, just for a second. "I guess they didn't think I mattered." Another lie. Outside the room, Eric leaned against the wall, arms folded tight. 2 weeks with Marone's people, and they just let her live. Adam didn't answer. He was thinking the same thing. But as he glanced back through the one-way glass, Evelyn met his gaze directly. And for just a heartbeat, her eyes were unreadable. Not fear, not relief. Something else entirely. Something dangerous. Shadows in the safe house. The rain tapped against the windows of the safe house like impatient fingers, an unrelenting rhythm in the quiet Brooklyn neighborhood. The building was nothing special, a nondescript apartment tucked between a shuttered laundromat and a vacant deli. To most passersby, it looked like a place waiting to be forgotten. That was precisely why the NYPD used it. Detective Adam Cole leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching Evelyn Reed. The soft yellow glow of the single overhead light washed over her face, making her bruises look darker, her eyes more hollow. She sat at the small kitchen table, one hand wrapped around a cup of tea, the other idly tracing the edge of the cheap wooden surface. Her fingernails were short and bitten down to the quick. It had been 48 hours since the raid at Pier 19. 2 days of questions, evasions, and half-truths. Adam had interviewed enough witnesses to know when someone was hiding something, but with Evelyn, the line between victim and liar blurred like cigarette smoke in a barroom. He had learned 3 things for certain. She was terrified. She was hiding something. She trusted him, or at least wanted him to think she did. "Want more tea?" Adam asked, his voice quieter than usual. Evelyn shook her head, her eyes flicking up to meet his for half a second before returning to the table. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. No one came out of 2 weeks in a syndicate stronghold fine. But Adam let it go. He wasn't here to play therapist. He was here to find out if she was bait, a plant, or just incredibly lucky. "Any nightmares last night?" he asked. She exhaled softly, her fingers still tracing the table's edge. "I didn't sleep much." Adam nodded, pushing away the sympathy creeping into his chest. Sympathy clouded judgment. He had learned it the hard way once, with his wife, with a different case, a different kind of heartbreak. He was about to leave when Evelyn spoke again, her voice soft, almost swallowed by the rain. "Do you ever feel like you're not sure who you are anymore?" she asked. Adam froze, caught off guard by the question's weight. He turned slowly. "What do you mean?" She lifted her gaze, her eyes glossy but sharp. "Like you're playing a part so well, you don't know if it's even a part anymore." Adam's stomach twisted, but his face remained calm. "Yeah," he said, his voice quieter than before. "I know exactly what you mean." There was silence between them, thick and heavy, until Adam finally stepped out into the rain, leaving Evelyn alone with her tea and her secrets. The puzzle pieces don't fit. Back at the precinct, Captain Rachel Torres and Detective Eric Monroe were neck-deep in case files, their desks littered with reports, surveillance photos, and maps with red strings crisscrossing every inch of the paper. Adam arrived soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, the weight of doubt sitting on his shoulders like a wet coat. "Tell me you got something," Torres said, barely looking up. Adam dropped into a chair, water pooling beneath him. "Nothing that makes sense." "She talk?" Eric asked, leaning forward. "She talks," Adam said, rubbing his forehead. "But every answer feels rehearsed, like she's memorized a script." Torres frowned. "Could be trauma. Or it could be that she's lying through her teeth," Eric muttered. Adam didn't argue. The idea had already taken root in his mind. Evelyn's story was too clean, too tidy. No one survived 2 weeks in Marone's world by accident. "Run her background again," Adam said. "Dig deeper. Family, jobs, every place she's ever lived." Torres gave a short nod. "Already on it." "Any movement on Marone?" Adam asked. "Ghost," Eric grunted. "It's like the man evaporated." Adam's jaw clenched. Marone always did this, slipped into the cracks between law enforcement and street crime, vanishing until the heat cooled down. But this time, something was different. Marone wasn't just hiding. He was regrouping. And Evelyn was part of it. A daughter's doubt. That night, Adam's house was dim, the only light coming from the TV where cartoons flickered soundlessly. His daughter, Lily, sat curled up on the couch, her knees tucked under her chin, her gaze locked on the screen. She didn't turn when Adam walked in. "You were at her place again," she said, her voice flat. Adam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was working." "You like her," Lily said, still not looking at him. "She's a witness," Adam said, sitting on the edge of the couch. "That's all." Lily finally turned, her small face pinched in suspicion. "She's lying." Adam felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. "What makes you say that?" Lily shrugged, her shoulders small beneath her oversized hoodie. "She smiles too much when you're looking, but when you turn around, her eyes change, like she's waiting for something." The words sent a chill down Adam's spine, because they mirrored his own thoughts, the flickers of calculation in Evelyn's eyes, the way her fear sometimes felt too precise, too directed. "I'm watching her," Adam said softly. I promise. Lily didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. Okay. She turned back to the cartoons, but Adam knew she was still thinking about Evelyn. And so was he. A strange request. The next day, Evelyn made a request that caught Adam off guard. "Can I go for a walk?" she asked, standing at the window of the safe house, her fingers brushing the edge of the curtain. Adam hesitated. "We can arrange an escorted trip." "No," Evelyn said, her voice soft but firm. "I want you to take me." Adam's gut tensed. There was no reason for him to say yes, but he did. They walked through a quiet park near the safe house, the kind of place where people jogged and old men played chess under broken lampposts. The air was cool, the rain from the night before still clinging to the grass. Evelyn walked slowly, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes darting to every shadow. "I used to come to a park like this when I was a kid," she said. "Where?" Adam asked, his curiosity piqued. "Upstate," she said quickly, too quickly. "Small town. Nothing worth remembering." Another lie. Adam stopped walking. "Why do I feel like I'm talking to two different people?" Evelyn froze, her back stiffening. "What do you mean?" "There's the scared woman in that warehouse," Adam said. "And then there's the woman who's always watching, always thinking 3 steps ahead." Evelyn turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "Maybe I had to learn how to survive." Adam held her gaze. "Surviving's one thing, lying's another." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, might fight. But then her shoulders sagged. "I'm not who you think I am," she said quietly. "Then who are you?" Her lips parted, but before she could answer, her phone buzzed. Adam's eyes narrowed. "You're not supposed to have a phone." Evelyn swallowed hard. "It's just a burner." Adam held out his hand. "Give it to me." She hesitated, then handed it over. The screen showed only one message. "Midnight. Same place." Adam's gut twisted. It wasn't from the NYPD. It was from someone on the inside. Morone. Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." But she didn't, because some secrets were easier to carry than the truth. The thin line between trust and betrayal. The burner phone sat on the scratched kitchen table, its screen gone dark, but still radiating tension like a live wire. Adam Cole stood over it, hands pressed flat against the table, knuckles pale with pressure. His pulse thudded in his ears, each beat a reminder that Evelyn Reed wasn't just some frightened victim plucked from Morone's grip. She was something else, something far more dangerous. Evelyn stood across the room, arms folded tightly around herself, back against the peeling paint of the safe house wall. Her eyes were locked onto the floor, unable, or unwilling, to meet his gaze. "Who's the message from?" Adam's voice was low, calm, too calm. "I don't know," Evelyn said, the words too quick, too neat. Adam lifted the phone, turning it in his hand. "Midnight, same place." He repeated the message out loud, letting the silence stretch after it. "What place, Evelyn?" Her jaw tightened, her fingers curling into the sleeves of her hoodie. "I don't know." Adam slammed the phone onto the table, the sound snapping through the room like a gunshot. "Stop lying to me." Evelyn flinched, but only for a second. When she lifted her head, something shifted behind her eyes. Not fear, but calculation. It was so fleeting Adam almost missed it. Almost. "You're scaring me," she said, voice trembling. But Adam had spent years interrogating men far colder than Evelyn. He knew the difference between genuine fear and performance. And this was an act. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to step back. "I need the truth, Evelyn. Now." Her lips parted, but the words stuck. Then, after a long pause, she said softly, "I'm not working for Morone." Adam's jaw tightened. "That's not the truth." "It is." She took a step forward, her wide eyes searching his face. "I swear, I was at that warehouse because I saw something. Something I wasn't supposed to. They took me because I was a liability. And now they're texting you." Adam gestured at the phone. "They don't text liabilities, Evelyn. They'd bury them." Tears welled in her eyes, but Adam didn't let himself soften. Not this time. "Who are you really?" he asked. Evelyn's silence was her answer. Instincts don't lie. Later that night, Adam sat in his car across the street from the safe house. Rain streaked the windshield, and the rhythmic slap of the wipers barely cut through the storm inside his head. Lily's words echoed in his mind. "She's lying. She's sneaky. She was right." Adam had spent too many years ignoring his gut, telling himself he was being paranoid, that the weight of his badge was making him see shadows where there was only light. But not this time. This time, the shadows were real. He thumbed his phone, debating whether to call Captain Torres, to bring the whole task force down on Evelyn. Drag her in and rip the truth out of her piece by piece. But something held him back. Not loyalty. Not attraction. Curiosity. There was more to Evelyn than a scared woman in a warehouse. There was intelligence, precision, and something deeper, something that didn't fit neatly into the box labeled victim. Adam didn't just want to know the truth. He needed it. At 11:50 p.m., Evelyn left the safe house. Adam followed. The meeting in the dark. Evelyn moved like someone who had done this before. Head down, hood up, hands in her pockets, every step measured. She wove through alleys and side streets, her route too deliberate for someone taking a simple walk. She wasn't running. She was meeting someone. Adam kept his distance, his footsteps silent on the rain-slick pavement. He followed her to an abandoned parking garage, the concrete cavern lit only by flickering bulbs and the occasional headlights from passing cars above. Evelyn paused, checking her phone. Midnight. She wasn't alone. A man stepped from the shadows, his face obscured by the brim of a baseball cap, hands deep in the pockets of a black jacket. He moved with confidence, no hesitation in his steps. Not a goon. Someone higher up the food chain. Evelyn stopped a few paces away. "I told you not to contact me here." The man's voice was low, but Adam caught the edge of it. "You're late. You didn't give me much notice." Adam's hand tightened around the grip of his sidearm, heart pounding. Every nerve screamed to step out, arrest them both, and sort the truth out later. But he waited. He needed to hear what they were saying. "The shipment's off," the man said. "Morone's shifting everything." Evelyn stiffened. "What? Why?" "Because your cop boyfriend is too close." Adam's stomach dropped. "You're supposed to be keeping him distracted," the man continued. "Instead, you're making him suspicious." "I'm doing my job," Evelyn snapped, her voice low and sharp. "You're the one screwing this up." "Careful, Evelyn." The man took a step closer. "Morone's losing patience." Evelyn's face hardened. "Morone doesn't scare me." The man chuckled. "He should." Adam stepped forward, his gun raised. "NYPD, hands where I can see them." The man bolted, disappearing into the shadows before Adam could get a clear shot. Evelyn didn't run. She just stood there, her shoulders squared, her face calm. "You followed me," she said softly. "You lied to me," Adam said. Evelyn turned slowly, her face half-lit by the dim yellow light. "It's not what you think. It never is." Adam's gun didn't waver, but his voice cracked slightly under the weight of what he knew was coming. "I'm not working for Morone," Evelyn said. "Not really." "Then who was that?" Evelyn exhaled, her breath fogging in the cold air. "My handler." Adam's heart pounded louder. "Handler. I'm not with the syndicate," she said, stepping closer. "I'm deep cover." He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her. But too many lies had already passed between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" Evelyn's eyes softened, but her voice stayed sharp. "Because I didn't know if I could trust you." Adam laughed bitterly. That's rich. I've been under for 2 years, she said. I had to make Marone believe I was loyal, right up until the moment you kicked down that door. Why the secrecy now? Adam demanded. Why sneak off like this? Because someone inside the NYPD is working for Marone, she said. I don't know who, but they're feeding him every move you make. Adam's blood went cold. I needed to know if it was you, she said quietly. He stared at her, the words slicing deeper than any knife. You thought I was the mole. Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't have to. The truth no one wanted. Back at the precinct, Adam stood outside Captain Torres' office, his knuckles hovering over the door. Every instinct screamed at him to open it, to tell her everything. About Evelyn, about the mole, about the dangerous game they were all caught in. But then Evelyn's words echoed in his mind. Someone inside the NYPD is working for Marone. If Evelyn was telling the truth, if someone inside was feeding information to the syndicate, then telling Torres might mean Evelyn's death. And if Evelyn was lying, if this was all just another layer of deception, then Adam was already too compromised to see the difference. He lowered his hand. For now, he would keep the truth to himself. Because in a city built on lies, sometimes the only way to find the truth was to become part of the deception. The house of cards. The precinct felt colder than usual, not physically, but in the way tension could turn a place into a cage. Every glance from fellow officers felt sharper, every conversation more clipped. Adam Cole walked the narrow hallways with the weight of a man balancing on a fraying tightrope, every step carrying the possibility of collapse. Somewhere in this building, someone was working for Victor Marone. The thought had sunk its claws deep into Adam's mind since Evelyn's revelation. He didn't trust her, not completely, but he trusted the fact that Marone's people always seemed a step ahead. Someone inside the department had been feeding him their moves for months, and that someone was still here, watching, waiting. He passed the open break room, catching a glimpse of Eric Monroe nursing a cup of coffee, his shoulders hunched in a way Adam recognized as exhaustion just barely held at bay. Their partnership had been built on trust, the kind forged in back alleys and firefights. But even that bond felt fragile now. Could Eric be the leak? Could Torres? Could any of them? The paranoia was a poison in Adam's veins. A widening divide. Hey, Eric called out as Adam approached their shared desk. You've been ghosting me all day. Adam sat heavily, the chair creaking beneath his weight. Had some things to check out. Eric's eyes narrowed slightly. With our mystery lady. Adam froze just long enough for Eric to catch it. Dan, Adam, you're falling for her. It's not like that, Adam said, his voice rough. Eric leaned in, his voice lowering. Isn't it? You've been off ever since we found her. It's like you've got one foot in this case and the other in her lap. Adam's jaw tightened. She's a witness. Eric snorted. Yeah. Witness to what? Marone's morning routine. Back off, Adam said, but there was no heat behind it. He knew Eric was right, or at least partly right. There was a line between personal and professional, and Evelyn blurred it like a storm-choked horizon. Eric leaned back, shaking his head. You know what I think? I think you want her to be innocent so bad, you're willing to blind yourself to the truth. The words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they were too close to the truth Adam didn't want to face. The surveillance gamble. Later that night, Adam returned to the safe house, the night settling over Brooklyn like a thick blanket. He stood outside for a long minute before knocking, rain streaking down the back of his neck. Evelyn opened the door, her face softening when she saw him. Come in. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of tea and soap, a stark contrast to the scent of sweat and gun oil that clung to Adam like a second skin. Evelyn sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. Adam stayed standing, his arms crossed. We need to talk, he said. Evelyn's eyes flickered with something. Fear, anticipation, or both. I'm guessing this isn't a social visit. No, Adam said, his voice quieter than intended. Who's the mole? Evelyn's gaze dropped to the table. I don't know. Don't lie to me. She looked up sharply. I'm not lying, Adam. I've been under for almost 2 years. Embedded so deep I couldn't risk breaking cover, even when you found me. Morone doesn't trust anyone, but he trusts his inside man of the precinct. Adam's pulse pounded in his ears. Then give me something. A name. A clue. Evelyn's voice softened. All I know is the code name Morone uses for him. Whisper. That's it. Whisper. Adam repeated, the word coiling in his mind like smoke. That's not enough. It's all I have. Adam paced the room, the frustration clawing at his throat. Do you know what you've done to me? To my career? Every time I try to trust you, there's another lie waiting to knock me down. Evelyn stood, her own frustration flaring. I'm trying to survive. Adam, every lie I told was to stay alive long enough to end Morone. I didn't ask to be pulled out of that warehouse. I didn't ask for you to care. Adam stared at her, the silence between them thicker than the rain outside. I do care, he said, the admission slipping free before he could stop it. Evelyn's breath caught, her eyes softening for a heartbeat. I know. The ghost in the system. The next morning, Adam sat alone in his office, the flickering fluorescent light buzzing overhead. In front of him was a list. Every officer who had access to the Morone case files over the last 6 months. Some names were crossed off, others circled, but one had no marks at all. Eric Monroe. Adam stared at his partner's name, his gut twisting. It didn't make sense. Eric was loyal, always had been, but loyalty and desperation were close cousins. One bad debt, one mistake, and even the best cop could slip. He didn't want to believe it, but he had to know. Adam logged into the NYPD's internal system, digging into the access logs. Every officer left a trail, even if they tried to hide it. What he found was subtle, almost invisible, but there. Eric's logins lined up almost perfectly with every time Morone had been tipped off. The pieces fit too well. Adam's stomach clenched as the truth took shape. A truth he had tried to ignore because it was too close, too personal. His best friend, his partner, might be the leak. A dangerous choice. That night, Adam met Evelyn at a small diner near the East River, a place where the coffee was weak, the food was greasy, and no one asked questions. She sat in the back booth, her hands wrapped around a mug, her expression guarded. I found something, Adam said, sliding into the booth across from her. Evelyn's brow furrowed. What? I think the mole is Eric. Evelyn's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Adam expected shock, maybe denial, but what he saw instead was resignation. You already knew, Adam said softly. Evelyn nodded slowly. I suspected, but I couldn't prove it. Adam's hands curled into fists. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? He didn't answer. The silence stretched until Evelyn leaned forward, her voice low. If Eric is Whisper, it means Morone's going to burn him soon. That's what he does. Uses people until they're a liability, then wipes them out. Adam's mind spun. Eric's my partner. He's also a traitor, Evelyn said softly. Adam sat back, the weight of it settling over him. I need proof. Evelyn reached into her bag, sliding a flash drive across the table. I recorded my last meeting with Morone's handler. It's all on there. Adam stared at the drive, his chest tight. You risked your life for this. Evelyn's smile was bitter. I didn't have much of a life left to risk. Betrayal unmasked. Back at the precinct, Adam plugged the flash drive into his laptop, the screen filling with grainy video. The image was shaky, the audio crackling, but the voices were clear. Whispers getting sloppy, a voice said. Marone's voice. "Tell him if he screws up again, I'll bury him and his whole damn family." Adam's blood ran cold. The video ended, leaving only silence. Adam leaned back, closing his eyes. Eric, his friend, his partner, was working for Marone. Every conversation, every late-night case review, all of it had been a lie. A knock at his door jolted him upright. Eric stood there, his smile easy, his stance relaxed, the way only a man with nothing to lose could look. "Beer after shift?" Eric asked. Adam forced a smile. "Yeah, sounds good." But inside, the storm was already brewing. The weight of loyalty. The neon haze of the bar coated the cracked tile floor in a sickly green hue, the flickering open sign in the window barely hanging on like the tired drunks slumped at the far end of the room. It was a dive. The kind of place you could walk into and disappear if you didn't mind the stench of old whiskey, stale sweat, and broken promises. Detective Adam Cole sat at the farthest booth, his back to the wall, his eyes on the door. The weight in his chest was heavier than his sidearm, heavier than the badge tucked into his pocket. He was here to meet his partner, the man who might have been betraying him for years. The door creaked open, and Eric Monroe strolled in, his jacket damp from the rain, his smile easy as always. "Told you you'd need a drink," Eric said, sliding into the booth across from Adam. Adam forced a smile. "Long week." Eric signaled the bartender, ordering 2 beers without asking. It was muscle memory, the ritual they'd built over years of late shifts, blown cases, and close calls. But this time, the ritual felt hollow. "You've been quiet lately," Eric said, popping the cap off his beer. "Everything good?" Adam studied him, the lines around his eyes, the small twitch in his left hand, the kind of tells you only noticed after knowing someone for years. There was no guilt, no fear, just the comfortable mask of a man who thought he had everyone fooled. "Just tired," Adam said, taking a sip of his beer. "Feels like we're chasing ghosts." Eric laughed softly. "Marone's been doing this longer than we've been cops. You're not gonna catch him by grinding yourself into dust." Adam forced a chuckle, but the bitterness burned at the back of his throat. Eric wasn't worried, because Eric knew exactly where Marone was, what he was doing, and how far the NYPD could push before they crossed the line. "How's Evelyn?" Eric asked casually. Adam's grip on his glass tightened. "She's holding up. Still think she's clean." The question was so pointed, so calculated, it made Adam's pulse spike. "What's that supposed to mean?" Eric shrugged, leaning back. "Come on, man. 2 weeks with Marone's crew, and she walks out without a scratch. You really believe she's just some unlucky barmaid?" Adam's jaw clenched. "I think there's more to her story. But that doesn't make her dirty." Eric smirked. "You always did want to save people." The words hit harder than they should have, because they were true. Adam had spent his whole life trying to save people, his daughter, his partners, strangers on the street, and more often than not, it ended in failure. But not this time. "I ran access logs," Adam said, keeping his voice even. "Someone's been leaking our moves, every raid, every lead." Marone knew ahead of time. Eric's smile didn't waver. "That right?" Adam nodded. "Found something interesting, too. Most of the leaks trace back to your login." The smile faltered, just for a second, a crack in the mask, but it was enough. "You accusing me?" Eric asked, his voice low. "I'm asking you," Adam said, "as my partner." Eric leaned forward, the playful facade gone. "If you're looking for someone to blame, maybe check your new girlfriend. People do crazy things for a pretty face." Adam's pulse hammered, but he kept his expression neutral. "I want to believe you, Eric." Eric's gaze hardened. "Then do it." Adam leaned back, the air between them crackling with unspoken accusations. "We've been through too much for me to ignore this." "You've been listening to her too much," Eric said, his voice sharpening. She's playing you, Adam. Open your damn eyes. But Adam's eyes were open, and for the first time, he saw Eric not as a partner, but as a man with secrets, secrets that could get them all killed. Let's see where the chips fall, Adam said softly, finishing his beer. If I'm wrong, I'll owe you more than a drink. Eric said nothing. He just sat there, watching Adam like a man trying to decide if he needed to put a bullet in his best friend. The thin edge of trust. Back at the safe house, Evelyn was pacing, her bare feet silent on the cheap laminate floor. When Adam walked in, she froze, her eyes flickering with relief and something darker. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "Did you talk to him?" she asked. Adam nodded, closing the door behind him. "He knows I'm suspicious." Evelyn exhaled slowly, pressing her hands to her temples. "That's dangerous." "No kidding." They stood in silence for a moment, the storm outside tapping against the windows like fingers trying to get in. The distance between them felt smaller than before, but only because the danger was closing in. "What if he comes after you?" Evelyn asked. Adam shook his head. "He won't. Not yet." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice softer. "What if you're wrong?" Adam met her gaze, the flickering tension between them impossible to ignore. "Then I guess we find out." She was close enough now that Adam could see the faint scar along her jawline, the one that only showed when she was tired. Close enough to feel the heat radiating off her skin. Close enough to remember that trust wasn't something they had, only the illusion of it. "Adam," her voice faltered. He didn't let her finish. He stepped back, breaking the moment before it could become something dangerous. "We need to focus." Evelyn's expression shuddered, her walls slamming back into place. "Right. Focus." The leak in the walls. The next day, Adam went to Torres. "We have a leak," he said, shutting the office door behind him. Torres raised an eyebrow. "You think I don't know that?" "I think it's Eric." The silence was sharp, like a held breath before a storm. "You have proof?" Torres asked. Adam hesitated. "Not solid, but enough." Torres exhaled sharply. "If you're wrong." "I'm not." Torres studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll handle this carefully. No one tips him off. We do this by the book." But Adam knew. They were out of time for books and rules. The trap. That night, Evelyn and Adam sat in his car outside a rundown warehouse near the docks, a location Evelyn had fed to Eric through an intentionally overheard conversation. It was bait, and if Eric was the mole, he would pass it on to Marone. They waited. 11:52 p.m. Two black SUVs rolled up, headlights cutting through the fog. "Bingo," Evelyn whispered. Adam's stomach twisted. Part relief, part heartbreak. The SUV's doors opened, and Marone's men poured out, heavily armed, moving with the precision of men who knew exactly what they were walking into. It was supposed to be an empty dock. Instead, Adam's team was waiting, hidden in the shadows. The ambush unfolded fast. Flashbangs, gunfire, shouting, and through it all, Adam saw Eric standing at the edge of it all, phone in hand. Adam stepped out, his gun raised. "Eric." Eric turned, his expression a perfect storm of rage and regret. "Damn it, Adam." "It's over," Adam said. "No," Eric whispered. "It's just getting started." And then Eric raised his gun. Adam didn't think. He fired. The shot rang out, echoing off the water. Eric staggered, his hand pressed to his side, blood blossoming beneath his jacket. "You should have trusted me," Eric said, his voice slurred with pain. "I did," Adam said quietly. "That's the problem." Eric dropped to his knees, his gun clattering to the concrete. Adam stood over him, his chest tight, his heart breaking, because even after all the lies, it still felt like losing family. The price of the truth. The cold fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway buzzed faintly, drowning in the sterile silence that hung between the beep of machines and the shuffle of nurses' shoes. Adam Cole stood just outside the door to room 412, staring through the small glass panel at the man lying inside. Eric Monroe. The man who'd been his partner for nearly a decade. The man who had betrayed him. Eric lay motionless, the bullet wound in his side wrapped in gauze, his skin pale and waxy under the harsh lights. A machine tracked the sluggish rise and fall of his chest. Alive, but barely. Adam's fists were jammed deep into the pockets of his jacket. He wanted to hate him. Needed to. But all he felt was that dull ache behind his ribs, the one that came with losing someone who was supposed to have your back. The door opened behind him, and Captain Rachel Torres stepped up beside him. Her face was carved from stone, her lips pressed into a thin line. "He hasn't said a word," she said quietly. "Doctors say he's stable, but it'll be a while before he's strong enough to talk." Adam didn't reply. Torres folded her arms. "We found the foam on him." "Same burner," Evelyn flagged. Adam's jaw clenched. "So, it's confirmed." Torres exhaled. He was the leak. It was the confirmation Adam had expected, but hearing it didn't bring relief. Only weight. "What I don't get," Torres continued, "is why." Eric was solid. Not flashy, but dependable. No signs of debt, no sudden cash flow. Nothing to suggest he was dirty. Adam's fingers curled into fists. Everyone's got a pressure point. Torres glanced at him. What was his? Adam shook his head. "I'll find out." He left before she could press further. Safe house confessions. The safe house was dim when Adam returned, the only light coming from the small lamp near the couch where Evelyn sat curled beneath a blanket. Her hair was damp, her legs tucked under her, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She didn't look up when Adam walked in. She didn't have to. "It was him, wasn't it?" she asked softly. Adam sat on the opposite end of the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "Yeah." Evelyn nodded slowly, but there was no satisfaction in it. Only a weary acceptance, as if she'd known all along how this would end. "How did Marone get to him?" Adam asked. Evelyn's fingers traced the frayed edge of the blanket. "I don't know the details. But Marone, he finds your cracks. Whatever you're hiding, whatever you're afraid of losing, he finds it. And once he's got you, there's no getting out." Adam leaned back, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. "Did you ever have a choice?" Evelyn finally looked at him, her eyes dark with something that might have been guilt, or maybe just survival. "Once." "What happened?" Evelyn's lips curled into a brittle smile. "I made the wrong one." Adam stared at her, searching for the woman she was beneath the layers of lies and fear and self-preservation. He wasn't sure he could find her, or if she even knew who she was anymore. "Do you still want out?" he asked. Evelyn's breath hitched slightly. "More than anything." "Then help me finish this," Adam said. "Help me take Marone down for good." She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening on the blanket. "There's something you need to know." Adam's stomach clenched. "What?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "There's another leak." Adam's pulse stuttered. "What?" Evelyn closed her eyes. Eric wasn't the only one. "There's someone higher, someone close to Marone, someone Marone trusts more than anyone." Adam's mind reeled. "In the department?" "No," Evelyn said. "In his own circle." The last deal. The next evening, Evelyn led Adam to a high-rise apartment overlooking the East River, not one of Marone's typical safe houses, but a property buried under shell companies and fake names. Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she punched in the door code, the faint beep of each number echoing in the silence. Inside, the apartment was cold and modern, glass and steel with no personal touches. It was the kind of place you bought when you didn't plan to stay. Evelyn moved carefully, every step hesitant, every breath shallow. Adam's hand rested on his holstered weapon, tension coiled in his spine. Who lives here? Adam asked. Evelyn's fingers curled around the edge of the marble counter. Morone's right hand. Adam's breath caught. You said Morone's right hand was the second leak. Evelyn's knuckles whitened. I did. Who is it? Adam asked, his voice low. Evelyn turned slowly, her eyes locked onto his. Me. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Adam froze. What? I was his right hand, Evelyn said softly. I was Whisper's contact. Every order, every tip, every time Eric needed guidance, it came through me. The room swayed slightly, but Adam held still. You were working both sides. Evelyn's smile was brittle. I was surviving. Adam's hand hovered near his gun. Why tell me now? Evelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Because I'm tired. Because you deserve the truth before this ends. Adam's throat worked around the knot of betrayal and understanding tangled inside him. You're still in contact with Morone. It wasn't a question. Evelyn nodded. If we're going to bring him down, we need to use that. Adam's heart pounded. Bait. Evelyn's smile was thin. Exactly. The final play. They set the trap in motion that night. A meeting arranged through Evelyn's still active channels, a whispered promise of safe passage for Morone in exchange for one last job. The location, an abandoned construction site on the waterfront. The bait, Evelyn herself. The trap, every officer Adam trusted, and no one else. Rain slicked the concrete, pooling in the hollowed-out shell of what was meant to become luxury condos. Evelyn stood in the center of the skeletal frame, her hands clenched at her sides, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. Adam watched from cover, his heart hammering in his chest. She was the perfect bait, too valuable to leave behind, too dangerous to trust completely. Headlights cut through the rain, and 3 black SUVs rolled onto the site. Victor Morone stepped out, his leather coat gleaming in the downpour, his expression carved from stone. His men fanned out, automatic weapons at the ready. Evelyn, Morone said, his voice smooth, almost affectionate. I should have known you'd find a way to crawl out. Evelyn's chin lifted slightly. I want out, Victor. Morone chuckled. Out? There is no out. There is tonight. Morone's smile faded. You're making a mistake. Evelyn's fingers curled into fists. So did you. The first shot rang out, shattering the brittle silence. Adam's team moved fast, floodlights snapping on, voices shouting commands. Morone's men opened fire, bullets ricocheting off steel beams and splintering wood. Adam moved through the chaos, his focus locked on Morone. Morone ducked behind a pillar, his gun drawn. Adam closed in, every step powered by years of frustration, failure, and determination. Drop it, Adam shouted. Morone's smile was razor-sharp. You don't have the guts. Adam fired. The shot slammed into Morone's shoulder, spinning him back against the pillar. His gun clattered to the floor. Adam stepped closer, his own weapon steady. It's over, Adam said, his voice shaking slightly. Morone's gaze flicked past Adam, to Evelyn. Is it? Morone whispered. Adam turned just in time to see Evelyn raise her gun, but not at him. At Morone. Her hands were steady. You're done. Morone's laugh was soft. You were always my best work. Evelyn's finger tightened on the trigger. She didn't miss. Epilogue. New days, old scars. A week later, Adam stood on the front steps of his house, the early morning light soft on the wet pavement. Evelyn stood beside him, her hair pulled back, her face pale but steady. Where will you go? Adam asked. Somewhere quiet, she said. Somewhere I can remember who I was. Adam nodded. You're not her anymore. Evelyn's smile was faint. Maybe that's okay. She kissed him once, soft, fleeting, and then she was gone. Lily appeared in the doorway, watching her father. Is it over? She asked. Adam's smile was tired. Almost. But some ghosts never leave.